Order, order. I call Caroline Ansell to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chope, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. I beg to move that this House has considered the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. I am pleased to have secured this debate. It's particularly fitting. Just a few days ago, Tuesday, 2nd of November, we marked the beginning of a year-long of events leading to the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, one of the most defining moments in the UK's shared history with Israel. On that November day, back in 1917, it was a Conservative Foreign Secretary, Arthur James Balfour, that gave the official approval of Her Majesty's government to the Zionist movement's aspiration for Jewish self-determination. This paved the way for the creation of the State of Israel in their historic homeland, following centuries of exile and persecution around the world. This landmark letter, comprised of just 3 paragraphs, has been the subject of intense historical debate, right up to and including, I'm sure, today. I will.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. But the British government of that day could well be accused of duplicity, because not only was it issuing the Balfour Declaration, but it had guaranteed, one way or other, to the Sheriff of Mecca and other Arab leaders that the Arabs would be allowed to have the homeland. So they're either duplicitous or they're incompetent in 1917.
Caroline Ansell.
Honourable friend for his intervention. My understanding is that that challenge has been made, but was refuted, and strongly so, by Churchill back in the day. In his letter, this landmark letter, comprised of just 3 paragraphs, the subject of our debate today, sets out that aspiration for a Jewish homeland. And I am proud that our country supported the establishment of that national home. And I am proud too of the strength of the UK-Israeli relationship. Our partnership in trade, technology, medicine, academia, our shared values have flourished in the 68 years of Israel's young life. In his letter, Foreign Secretary Balfour pledged to Lord Rothschild, a leading member of British Jewry, that he would view with favour, and Her Majesty's government endorsed, the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country.
I'm glad she read through, because would she agree with me that the first part of that equation has been dealt with, i.e. the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, not obviously the whole of Palestine, and that perhaps the concentration for the next immediate period should be on the second part, which clearly hasn't been achieved, which is the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities, and that should be our priority.
Caroline Ansell.
Thank the honourable gentleman for his intervention, and his point is well made. I think where we might disagree is on reasons why that second aspiration has not come to pass. And I think what is really important about the letter, which has been contested, is that very swiftly this letter, this non-binding Balfour Declaration, was endorsed and enshrined in binding agreements ratified by the international community in the San Remo Resolution, the Sèvres Peace Treaty, and then ratified by all 51 countries of the League of Nations when the British mandate for Palestine was approved in 1922.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Happily.
Thank my honourable friend for giving way. Whilst we're living in a fast-changing world and no treaties at any time are entirely immutable, I think she speaks, I speak, and many of our colleagues here would recognise the importance, hopefully the globally recognised importance of recognition of an Israeli homeland. And whilst I accept there is still work to be done to ensure that every aspect of the Balfour Declaration is put into place, and that will be work that we will hopefully play a part in the decades to come. it is equally important to recognise that Israel has been a success story and its right to exist should be recognised on a global basis.
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention and for that reaffirmation that whilst Britain did lead in this regard, it was supported across the world in that shared stated intention to see a homeland returned to the Jewish people.
On that point, I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way. On the subject of leadership, does she agree with me that given Britain's very prominent historical role, that Britain needs to play a very active part in trying to find a solution to this and ensuring that a two-state solution is implemented?
Indeed I do. So, in this, the League of Nations, the precursor of the United Nations, formally recognised, and this is critically important to what follows, formally recognised the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. Through its use of the term reconstituting, the international community formally recognised the pre-existing ties of the Jewish people to their homeland, in which there had been a continuous Jewish presence for millennia. So 100 years on, and Israel today is a multiracial, multi-ethnic democracy where Arab, Druze and other minorities are guaranteed equal rights under law. Israel's 1.7 million strong Arab minority, around 20% of the local population, participates fully in Israel's political system. And there are currently 17 Israeli Arab members in the 120-seat Knesset. Israeli Arabs serve as university professors, senior police and army officers, the heads of hospital departments, and an Arab judge sits on the country's Supreme Court. Opponents of Zionism and the State of Israel have freedom of speech and are permitted to form political organisations within the country. In fact, Israel is the only country in the world whose parliament has members advocating for the destruction of the state. Elsewhere in the Middle East, minority communities live in starkly different circumstances. The Christian community, for example, in decline, serious and dramatic decline across much of the Middle East due to persecution and oppression, whilst in Israel, Christians enjoy full rights and freedoms. Indeed, Christians make up the largest religious community in Israel after Jews and Muslims, and the holiest sites in Christianity are protected by Israel. Britain and Israel have an enduring relationship, shaped by both our historical ties and our extensive cooperation and shared interests today. The Prime Minister recently described the relationship between our two countries as remaining as strong as ever, based not only on bilateral trade, scientific research and security cooperation, but the values we share, like freedom, democracy and tolerance. The value of bilateral trade in both directions over the past 10 years has increased by 60%, and in 2015 reached a record high of almost $6 billion.
When congratulations on securing this debate, and she's making an insightful speech. But on the point of trade, does the Honourable Lady believe that there should be trade with the illegal settlements or with businesses that are located in the illegal settlements? And I ask particularly given that the European Union has recently banned trade with businesses in the Crimea, which, as we know, is an illegally annexed land, given that there are now 600,000 settlers living in the illegal settlements, and those settlements are clearly...
Order. We're going to have shorter interventions.
I apologise, Mr. Chair. My question is on the illegal settlements.
Will the honourable member resume his seat, please? Caroline Ansell.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. Yes, and the point around settlements, I think we need to look at that and see a far bigger picture, because what we're looking to determine today, and in the hereafter is a peace deal where Israel and Palestine can live, coexist, co-share and prosper and trade with one another. So I think the Honourable Gentleman, in focusing on that, is perhaps neglecting the very much bigger picture and the bigger ambition, because we want free trade across those borders and security for both peoples and all businesses operating in the region.
I thank my friend for giving way. I was very pleased what she had to say about cooperation between Christians, particularly in this country, and the Jewish community. But would she also recognise, as well as the trade to which she refers, there is a huge amount of incredibly important cooperation on security and intelligence between our two countries that was making the Middle East and the world, hopefully, a safer place in the years to come?
Ansell.
Thank my honourable friend for that intervention and recognise the very great merit in what he says, and particularly in the new relationships in that part of the world with peace deals with Egypt and Jordan, securing much greater stability in the region and courtesy of that technological advancement, greater security across the world. Yes.
Lady for giving way, and she rightly draws attention to the much better relations between Israel and its Arab neighbours. Isn't now the key to a sustainable peace that those who are involved in negotiations commit themselves to full recognition of the State of Israel, securely positioned alongside a Palestinian state with international guarantees, and also a rejection of those groups that campaign against the very existence of Israel? And shouldn't all those who participate in this debate make clear their commitment to that as the starting point of the process?
Ansell.
The honourable gentleman for his intervention, and his point is so very well made. That is the starting point, and that is the journey. And I think we do well to preface all of our speeches with that intention, that we want to see both sides come together, engage in peace talks for the peace and security of both countries, the region and the world.
Very briefly, would we not have a two-state solution today if the armies of 5 Arab states had not invaded the newly independent declared state of Israel in 1948? And it's really from that decision that the Palestinians lost their allocated share and their homeland.
Caroline Ansell.
Thank my honourable friend for his intervention, and I think that UN-sponsored partition plan for Palestine in 1947 was a very significant missed opportunity. How different the region might be today, how many lives might be spared, because there is suffering and there is loss on both sides. How different things might have been back in the day if the Arab leadership had taken up that UN-sponsored partition plan. And to reprise Britain's ties with Israel and how we feel the benefit of that relationship, consider, for example, that 1 in 6 generic prescription drugs issued by the NHS comes from an Israeli pharmaceutical company. Indeed, it was announced just a few weeks ago by my honourable friend, the member for Warrington South, that without these supplies from Israel, there would likely be significant shortages of some medicines important for patient health. Brexit provides us with an opportunity to negotiate a new trade deal with Israel, and I welcome that the government has already confirmed its determination to secure a deal and further strengthen our trading relationship.
Does Israel's participation in Horizon 2020 indicate post-Brexit that the European Union will still be open, not only to Israel but to Britain in this really important area of scientific research?
My honourable friend, and I would say I think indeed it does. So whilst the UK's relationship and ties with Israel are strong, and we see Israel's contribution to our own economy, its contribution to the world also should be recognised in this landmark moment. Israel has defied the challenges posed by an arid climate, small population and security threats to make significant contributions to the advancements of the world. Israeli inventions have transformed the way we live our lives. The algorithm for sending emails, mobile phone technology, technology for antivirus software, instant messaging, and the USB flash drive, all developed in Israel. It's little surprise that so many multinational tech giants have established R&D facilities in Israel. Apple, Windows, Intel, HP, Google, many more, all have a presence in a country that's actually the size of Wales. From helping refugees in Lesbos to fighting Ebola in West Africa, Israeli aid teams are a common and welcome sight for countries at their time of need. And on my visit to Israel last year, I had the very great pleasure of visiting Save a Child's Heart, an extraordinary project which provides life-saving surgery to children with cognitive heart defects. The lives of children throughout the developing world have been saved by Israeli doctors. There is much to recognise here, much to value, and much to celebrate. And in marking...
She also spoke to Palestinians, whether she went to see what's happening in the West Bank, because next year is also the 50th anniversary of what is a brutal military occupation of someone else's territory. And so that key point is resolved. You will not have two peoples living together in peace.
Ansell.
Well, gentlemen, I did have the opportunity in that visit to meet with Palestinians, to meet with business leaders, and to meet with property developers, and saw a development the like of which I have never seen before at Rawabi. In its scale, in its scope, in its vision, in its ambition, a whole city rising out of the ground. I have never seen anything so truly astonishing. And that place, built by Palestinians, built for Palestinians, 40,000 homes looking to be delivered, is, I think, a really positive vision for what the future could look like. So on our Centenary Declaration, we began earlier this month and will continue until the 100th anniversary in November 2017. Jewish, communal and Israel advocacy organisations have launched an official Balfour 100 campaign, providing helpful educational resources, and will be hosting a series of events. The Prime Minister has expressed her desire to mark the occasion, and the Minister also, and I would like to thank him for his remarks. But Israel does not live in peace and security, and the Palestinians have not acceded to their own recognised state. And as the Honourable Gentleman raised earlier, how different things might have been had the Arab leadership, back in the day, in 1947, adopted that UN partition plan. The region could look very different today. Two prosperous states, one Arab, one Jewish, working together and more faithfully reflecting the Balfour aspiration that civil and religious rights of all be safeguarded. And over the years, proposals have been rejected for a two-state solution in recent decades, including Camp David at the turn of the century, more recently in 2008. Israel unilaterally withdrew from Gaza in 2005 in an effort to bring more momentum to the peace process, and gifted with highly educated population and a very beautiful Mediterranean coastline. Gaza had the potential to be the Singapore of the East, it's been said. But rather than being able to seize this opportunity, the Islamist terror group Hamas has committed Gazan civilians to ongoing rounds of violence. Instead of...
And would she agree with me that when I asked a Palestinian official why several thousand greenhouses had been destroyed during that period, I received the reply how we were very stupid to do so, that it is a bit surprising because there was in fact a great opportunity there that was squandered.
Yes, indeed, it was an opportunity, and I think with the benefit of hindsight how different that might have been. So instead of participating in face-to-face talks, the PA has chosen to pursue unilateral measures in the international arena, and unilateralism is the rejection of the peace process, not a means to revive it. Worse yet, the Palestinians remain divided with fierce internal rivalry between Hamas and Fatah. And following the recent cancellation of long overdue local elections, it doesn't seem the two camps will come together anytime soon.
Does she agree that it's very difficult to come to sensible negotiations on a two-state solution if the other side doesn't turn up or indeed recognise the existence of the other side to exist?
Ansell.
Thank the Honourable gentleman for his intervention, and he highlights two essential truths, beautifully simple, that there must be mutual recognition and there must be direct talks, and without these, this process cannot move forward. And so I hope that in this landmark time, that is exactly the call from us all, in one voice, to urge both sides to come together again and take up talks. And I believe as the engineers of the Balfour Declaration, it is all the more important for our country to work with both parties to return to those peace talks. And therefore I asked the Minister what recent discussions he has had with his Israeli and Palestinian counterparts on the return to direct negotiations and what the prospects are for the resumption of peace talks without preconditions. The Palestinian people rightly deserve to live their lives out in peace and prosperity. And as I said previously, during my time in the West Bank, I visited that remarkable new city of Rawabi that offers up such hope for a better future. And very recently, just in this last summer, there are new partnerships coming forward too. At the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, 2 new programs are bringing Israelis and Palestinians together. And speaking of it, the lead professor said, as a leading academic and research institution, we are committed to advancing science for the benefit of all people. Through this new partnership with the British government, Palestinian graduate students are already contributing to world-leading research at the university. We are delighted to have them with us. This programme, he says, not only advances science, but through it sends a message of hope and friendship and of the importance of working together to find solutions that improve the health of our communities. Such projects do bring hope and show what can be achieved.
I thank her very much for
No.
Does she not accept that the Palestinian people have been badly let down by their leadership? And when I spoke to the PLO about duplicating Rawabi, they told me they didn't want anything to do with it because it involved the private sector. And that is a disgraceful approach to a very, very significant project in the region.
Ansell.
My honourable friend, yes indeed, I understand that much negotiation was done to bring this project to light, and without perhaps the blessing of the leadership who perhaps pulled back from wanting the world to see a more prosperous Palestine. But whilst leaders need to step up, it is through relationships, everyday people from both communities, that real and lasting peace will ultimately be established. And whilst there have been no direct peace talks in several years now, there have been some recent signs of progress on both sides. We should welcome that Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has underlined his commitment to restarting peace negotiations without preconditions, and that PA President Mahmoud Abbas attended the funeral of former Israeli President Shimon Peres in September. And recent polling has shown that there is still yet an appetite for a two-state solution amongst both Palestinians and Israelis, the people. Peace.
Would you agree with me that, as we found in Northern Ireland and in other locations across the globe, until those who either advocate violence or give it quiet endorsement, until they get to the point where they accept there is no point and it becomes totally counterproductive in arriving at a successful conclusion, until we get to that point, it becomes exceptionally difficult to arrive at, in this instance, a two-state solution?
Ansell.
The honourable gentleman is right in everything he says. But peace is possible, and there is precedent for peace in the lasting peace deals with Egypt in 1979 and with Jordan in 1994. So I would like to simply conclude my remarks by saying that there is much in this last century to value, to recognise, to celebrate, and there is much more to which we need to aspire to make sure that the peoples of both these communities can continue and can live and can prosper.
The question is that this House has considered the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. Ivan Lewis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chope. I want to begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for Eastbourne on securing this debate, and I think a very good opening set of remarks. The debate gives us the opportunity to reflect on the unique contribution of this country to the creation of the modern State of Israel. There is much to be said about the historical significance of the Balfour Declaration, but I want to focus my remarks on its significance in the context of today's stark realities. We are seeing a serious and concerning resurgence of anti-Semitism globally, which is more often than not inextricably linked to a hostility towards the State of Israel. In many quarters, Zionism has become a toxic word and equated by some with the oppression of the Palestinian people. In the recent past, there was a global campaign by Israel's strongest critics to falsely equate Zionism with racism. While it is true, and we should make this point, that some inappropriately label any criticism of the Israeli state as anti-Semitism, it is also true that hostility towards Israel and Zionism too often consists of language and imagery which crosses a line and becomes anti-Semitism, or to give it its true name, Jew hatred. This is the case among some on the left in this country, including, sadly, a small minority in my party. It's led to a significant flight of Jews from France and is a growing problem in many European countries. Too often, anti-Semitism is viewed as a second-class form of racism and justified or legitimised by many who claim to be staunch anti-racism campaigners but abhor Israel and attack Zionism. It is chilling that 100 years on from the Balfour Declaration, Marine Le Pen has a serious prospect of power in France, and the President-elect of the United States has appointed someone with well-documented anti-Semitic views to hold a senior position in his forthcoming administration. Incidentally, and I think we should put this on the record, Mr. Chope, it is equally chilling that the misogyny, homophobia and Islamophobia are trivialised as just part of the rough and tumble of an election campaign, as though women, LGBT people, Muslims, Mexicans and other minority communities can simply move on the morning after an election. That the anger, fear and insecurity for many citizens in a country which prides itself on being the world's leading liberal democracy should be relegated to a mere footnote in history. That would be the worst kind of double standards. So, Mr. Chope, no serious attempt to tackle contemporary anti-Semitism conduct the Zionism question. All too often, those who talk about tackling anti-Semitism don't want to recognise that fact. That's a point I raised forcefully in my direct representations, both to the leader of my party and Shami Chakrabarti as part of their recent inquiry. Zionism, Mr. Chope, is the right of the Jewish people to self-determination in their own state. A right to self-determination that many of Israel's fiercest critics demonstrate for on behalf of many other minority communities now around the world. It's true that a small minority demand in the name of Zionism a greater Israel, which means expansion of her current borders. But that is not the Zionism of the overwhelming majority. I passionately support a two-state solution, which means a viable Palestinian state and opposition to settlement expansion by Israel. I have profound differences with aspects of the current Israeli government's policies. But I'm proud to be a staunch supporter of the rights of the Jewish people to self-determination in the State of Israel. A right supported by the United Nations in 1947 and then enshrined by full recognition in 1949. And in terms of my party, this is in the finest traditions of the British Labour Party and many socialists who were the pioneers of the modern state of Israel. It was the British Labour Party which led the way in supporting the right of Jews to have a homeland in Palestine. 3 months prior to the adoption of the Balfour Declaration, Labour's policy, as stated, was Palestine should be set free from the harsh and oppressive government of the Turk in order that this country may form a free state under international guarantee to which such of the Jewish people as desire to do so may return, and may work out their salvation free from interference by those of alien race or religion. The party's then leader, Arthur Henderson, said, "The British Labour Party believes that the responsibility of the British people in Palestine should be fulfilled to the utmost of their power. It believes that these responsibilities may be fulfilled so as to ensure the economic prosperity, political autonomy and spiritual freedom of both the Jews and Arabs in Palestine." Mr. Choate, this debate has been a welcome opportunity to challenge both the rewriting of history and the ignorance of history, which are a toxic combination fueling so much of today's anti-Semitism. Certainly.
I thank my honourable friend very much.
Mr. Berger.
And in addition to the points that he just made, does he, like I, recognise and acknowledge the fact that it was the Labour Party that actually first expressed that support for the creation of the State of Israel in advance of the Balfour Declaration, and went on to re-establish and recommit that fact 11 times in the months and years that followed?
Ivan Lewis.
Yes, I think my honourable friend is absolutely right. That is a historical fact. And I guess the reason for wanting to make this point repeatedly is that there are some who talk about a two-state solution, which I support, and I know the Honourable Lady supports. But then if you look at the rhetoric and the language, what they appear to often be talking about is a one-state solution. And that state is not the state of Israel. So it is really important to make the point, in the context of the debate that rages often in our party increasingly at the moment, that that is an accurate reflection of history. And it's important, I think, to clarify the difference between saying that we want two states when you really mean you want one state. And that too often appears to be some of the language and the rhetoric that is used. So as I said, Mr. Choate, this has been a debate that's a timely debate. It's given us an opportunity to debate something which is incredibly important, particularly because of the impact it's having in contemporary Britain, but also in Europe and around the world. The Zionists have no right, to be clear, to seek exemption for Israel from legitimate criticism of the actions of her government, or brand those who engage in such criticism as anti-Semitic. But equally, some of Israel's fiercest critics must not be allowed to get away with the delegitimization of Israel through the rewriting of history, which seeks to deny the legal and moral basis of the Jewish people's right to self-determination in their own state. In my view, it's entirely consistent and morally right to both support and celebrate the Balfour Declaration and strongly and passionately support a two-state solution which includes a viable state for the Palestinians. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Under your chairmanship, I welcome the opportunity to take part in this important debate this morning, and I thank my honourable friend, the member for Eastbourne, for securing it. I am a long-time friend of the State of Israel. I'm proud to be so, and I'm pleased to say there's a significant number of my constituencies have been in contact with me to take part in this debate today, and I very much welcome their input. As they point out in their emails to me, the Balfour Declaration was the first official statement of recognition by a major foreign power of the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination, free and safe from persecution. And the support the British gave to the creation of a Jewish democratic state was a key stage of a process that eventually brought relief from 2 millennia of persecution and exile, as so eloquently stated by my right honourable friend for Eastbourne. As we've heard, the Balfour Declaration was subsequently ratified by all 51 countries of the League of Nations when the mandate for Palestine was approved in 1922, recognising the historical connection of the Jewish people with Palestine and the grounds for reconstituting their national home in that country. And of course, over the years, very many sought and found refuge after the Holocaust, and not just that, the expulsion of some 800,000 Jewish people from around the Middle East and North Africa. Since its rebirth in 1948, Israel has sadly been attacked many times, facing existential threats again and again. But despite these threats, Israel is a liberal, pluralist democracy committed to working for a peaceful settlement with all its neighbours. And it is certainly...
Simpson.
She has raised about the attacks. Would she agree with me that despite all the rhetoric of talks or whatever, the greatest people that suffer from this is the men, women and children, especially the children, when it comes to the attacks of Israel?
Teresa Villiers.
Yes, I think he makes an entirely valid point. As others have said, I fear the Palestinians have often been let down by their leadership. I think it is also very important to recognise that Israel is a multi-ethnic, a multi-faith democracy where Arab, Druze and other non-Jewish minorities are guaranteed equal rights under the law. And I thought it was a point well made when my honourable friend referred particularly to the fact that Christians enjoy full freedom of religion in Israel, unlike almost any other part of the Middle East. And of course, unlike many countries in the Middle East, the rights of women and LGBT people are fully protected in Israel, and that is something, again, to celebrate. And of course, in Israel, there is a famously independent-minded media and an equally independent judiciary, both of which are always willing to hold the Israeli government to account. So this debate, I think, is an important opportunity to speak out against those organisations who use boycott campaigns to seek to delegitimise the state of Israel. And I think the 12-month run-up to the centenary of this important declaration should provide us with an opportunity to celebrate the contribution Israel has made to the global community, an opportunity to condemn the sorts of anti-Semitism that we've just heard about in the debate this morning. And it is also, of course, an opportunity to reflect on how to get the peace process in the Middle East started once again. Whilst we may be divided in this room today on many issues, I'm sure we can all unite in our support for efforts to deliver a negotiated peace settlement for Israel and the Palestinians. And I'm sure that throughout the build-up to this important centenary next year, there will be a strong focus on seeking to get those negotiations going once again, with a view to finally securing that two-state solution, which we've already heard such strong support for amongst honourable members this morning, and we finally see a safe and secure Israel living beside a viable Palestinian state. And also, I think it's an opportunity, the centenary of this declaration is an opportunity to celebrate the bilateral relationship between the UK and Israel. Since its creation, the State of Israel has had an enduring partnership with our country, covering many areas, including trade, technology, science and medicine, academic research. Trade between our two countries is now at record highs, and the UK is Israel's second largest trading partner, with more than 300 Israeli companies operating in this country. And we've heard already about British-Israeli cooperation in technology. That's facilitating very significant numbers of business partnerships supporting jobs in both countries in areas such as fintech, clean tech, cybersecurity and health. And of course, Israel is a world leader in medical research, particularly stem cell research, and research underway in Israel is giving hope to many people with debilitating diseases such as Parkinson. The forthcoming centenary is an opportunity to further strengthen ties between our country and Israel in terms of culture, trade, academic life, and of course the Brexit decision opened up the opportunity of a trade deal. I think we should also, though, of course, use the forthcoming centenary to see if we can see further progress towards a long-term peaceful settlement in the Middle East. This, I believe, continues to be a foreign policy priority for our government, and I hope the Minister will assure us on those points. I think today's debate is a reminder of the very significant role the United Kingdom played in the creation of the State of Israel. So I think with that comes a continuing obligation to do all we can to support efforts to deliver a negotiated settlement to finally see a peaceful outcome and a two-state solution in the Middle East. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
On break.
Thank you, Mr. Mr. Chope. And can I start by saying I welcome this debate, and I should perhaps declare I'm the patron of the Balfour Project, and I just wanted to explain to people what the members, what the purpose of that project is. The Balfour Project invites the government and the people of the United Kingdom to mark the centenary of the Balfour Declaration on the 2nd of November 2017 by learning what the Balfour Declaration means for both Jews and Arabs, acknowledging that whilst a homeland for the Jewish people has been achieved, the promise to protect the rights of the Palestinian people has not yet been fulfilled, and urging the people and elected representatives of the UK to take effective action to promote justice, security and peace for both peoples. And I'm sure people will have noted that the Balfour Project is inviting the government and the people of Britain to mark the centenary. Now, I understand why the Jewish community will want to celebrate the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, which enabled the creation of the State of Israel. And as someone who has family in Israel, I celebrate that too. Equally, I will understand why the Palestinian people will want to grieve or lament on its centenary the failure of the British government to protect the rights of the Palestinian people. And I will grieve and lament with the Palestinian people too. And that is why the Balfour Project talks of marking the centenary. The Balfour Project takes its educational role very seriously. It's produced a film, which was shown in Westminster at an event I hosted in May, about the Balfour Declaration to help inform British citizens of our historical role in that region, and also a booklet which supports the initiative. I'm very happy to give it.
Will you join me in condemning the meeting that his former party colleague Baroness Tong hosted in the House of Lords, where the discourse was anti-Semitic, and will he condemn that meeting and his former colleague?
Of course I condemn that meeting, and she rightly said former party colleague, and I'm pleased that she is no longer a party colleague. I'm happy to give way.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. As I understand it, that meeting there was no anti-Semitism from the bench. It was a question asked from the audience that Baroness Tong didn't even hear, and it's been grossly misconstrued, that meeting, and it's wrong.
Well, I wasn't present at the meeting either, but certainly as I understand it, it wasn't a comment that she made. It was a comment that was made by a person in the audience that she did not then make a blunt statement rebutting. So, but the fact is that she is no longer a member of the Liberal Democrats. So it's our historical role in the region that led me to get involved in the Balfour Project, because I hadn't forgotten the bitterness and anger felt towards the British by young Palestinians I met some 10 years ago following an initiative from the organisation called Initiatives for Change. They felt that we had a central role here, both in terms of the failure to deliver for the Palestinian people, and also a central role in trying to ensure that that was now delivered. So how should the UK government be celebrating this? Well, I think, or commemorating or marking this, I think that is very obvious, and that is to fully support any peace initiatives that seek to implement the two-state solution before time runs out. And I hope that members would agree that there is a real risk that time will indeed run out. We know that perhaps the election of President Trump is unlikely to, I think, to help implement a two-state solution. And as far as I'm aware, the only game in town in terms of a peace initiative is the one that the French are currently running. Now, the Israeli government have said that they believe the French plan, and that, quoting them, greatly harms the possibilities for advancing the peace process. And I wonder whether our minister agrees with the Israeli government on that score. And would he take this opportunity perhaps to have a difference of opinion with the Israeli education minister, who says there is no two-state solution? As far as I'm aware, our position is that that is what our government are seeking to implement, and therefore I hope that he would challenge that statement from a senior Israeli minister. And is it the government's position that they want to encourage the Israelis to engage with that initiative in the way that Abbas has? And will he support proposals coming forward from that particular initiative, which would lead to, for instance, greater economic cooperation? I think that is an area where both the Israelis and the Palestinians can benefit mutually, but also proposals, for instance, to strengthen ties between Palestinian and Israeli civil society organisations as a first step, perhaps, towards a more meaningful peace process. Mr. Chope, I'm aware there are many others who want to contribute to this debate, so I'll just finish by saying that the UK has a particular historical responsibility towards the Palestinian people. We failed to honour our promises nearly 100 years ago. We have a duty now to actively support the peace process and to secure a viable Palestinian state. This is what our government must do. And this is what, indeed, a number of members have said today that they want our government to do. And that will be the most effective and meaningful way of marking the Balfour Declaration, and would mean that in future years, its anniversary could be celebrated by both the Jewish people and the Palestinian people.
The wind-ups will start at half-past, so the shorter the speeches, the more people we will be able to accommodate. Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, which I believe I will have the pleasure several weeks, possibly, in the future. Can I congratulate my honourable friend for Eastbourne for leading off this debate in such a balanced way. And I think what we should be talking about quite clearly is the celebration of the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. I take the point that the honourable member for Carshalton and Wallington put, but the reality is that the meeting that was held in the House of Lords under the auspices of the Palestinian Return Centre, was a Balfour apology campaign. And the president of the Palestinian state has sought to get Britain to apologise for the Balfour Declaration and potentially to sue the British government for so doing. And that is the context in which we have to consider this particular debate. Mr. Chair, I've had the opportunity of visiting both Israel as a tourist and with Conservative Friends of Israel, but also visiting Jordan and the West Bank with the Palestinian Return Centre to see both sides of the argument. And I think the reality of life in Israel on the West Bank is such that no one really should speak about this part of the world unless they've been there. Because Israel is the only country in the world where you can go on one side of the country, see the other, and know that you're surrounded by neighbours that want to destroy the state in its entirety. And that, of course, leads then to the reasons why Israel acts as it does. And I think we can say that throughout the history of the State of Israel, starting with the Balfour Declaration, which I think we should be celebrating, the one fact, of course, that was not put in the Balfour Declaration was the borders of the State of Israel. Had that been determined at the time, when Britain was drawing lines on maps in many other parts of the world, then possibly we would not be still trying to resolve the two-state solution that we talk about today. The reality is, of course, it took 3 years for the Balfour Declaration to be accepted worldwide, but accepted it was. And Israel then has had to endure the Second World War, the Holocaust, the 1948 War of Independence, attacked by Arab states that sought to wipe Israel off the face of the planet in its inception. A war in 67, when once again Israel was invaded. A war in 71, when Israel was invaded. And yet, still, Israel continues to exist. And we've heard during the various discussions about, supposedly, the Israeli government's intransigence. The reality is that Israel has demonstrated that it will give land for peace. The unilateral withdrawal from Gaza, which left behind buildings, agricultural opportunities, which could have been used by the Palestinian people, were just demolished, were ignored. And the result of the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza has been more than 11,000 rockets descending from Gaza onto the State of Israel. If you're in that position, Mr. Chope, I think you would react. And react the Israeli government has. We've also heard the reality of the situation that exists in this country. Anti-Semitism is on the rise. It's often conflated with belief that the State of Israel should not exist at all, or attacks on the government of the State of Israel. And the reality is we have to confront anti-Semitism wherever it rears its ugly head and make sure and understand that it is unacceptable to express such views, and it's unacceptable that anyone in this country should have to suffer that. Now, we've heard already from honourable members, particularly the Right Honourable Member for Chipping Barnet, of the trade, security, medicine, technology and science contribution that Israel has made to the world. We should remember Israel now is the 10th biggest economy in the world. It is a key trading partner to the UK and beyond. And I think the opportunities now for continuing both our trade under a new international trade agreement once we leave the European Union gives us a great opportunity to set that out very clearly over the next 2 years. And quite clearly, the other issue that's not been mentioned in this debate, which I think should be, is that of the plight of the Jewish people across the Middle East. Back in the 1950s, when Israel was in its infancy, there were 2.3 million Jewish people who lived in Arab states. Today, there are less than 100,000. They've all had to flee Arab states in fear of their lives and very existence. And so, therefore, we should remember that we are getting a greater and greater polarisation of the peoples of the Middle East, and I think that is a particular concern. So, Mr. Chair, I will give way on that.
Thank you, Morrison. But would he agree with me that there are countries within the Muslim world that have been very positive about Jews? And I'm thinking particularly of enlightened countries, relatively enlightened countries, like the Kingdom of Morocco, that has always welcomed Jews and treated them extremely well.
I thank my honourable friend for that contribution. And quite clearly, there are exceptions to this rule, but unfortunately, the generality of this is that the Jews have had to flee. So we look forward to a two-state solution, but we should also remember that the Palestinian state has never actually existed as an independent state. It has always been occupied by Jordan, by the Ottoman Empire, or someone else. So we are creating a state, and when we create a state, we must make sure there is peace, security on all sides, and an opportunity for everyone to live in peace. We are running out of time in terms of the Obama administration, and I suspect we are not going to see any movement between now and January from there. We have a new President of the United States, and I would ask our Minister to make sure that our government, our Foreign and Commonwealth Office, are negotiating with the new incoming regime in the States to initiate urgent talks between Israel and the Palestinians so that we can lead to that two-state solution, and therefore we will have the opportunity during the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration to actually get real meaningful talks without preconditions with the Israeli government and the Palestinians sitting down side by side so that everyone can actually benefit from the opportunity.
Jim Shannon. I'd like to speak in this. Can I first of all thank the Honourable Lady for Eastbourne for presenting the case very well. I'll be very conscious of my time and others want to speak, Mr. Chope, so I'll try and do that accordingly. I'm well known as a friend of Israel. Indeed, in my former role as an MLA, I sponsored the Stormont Christian Initiative, which had a strongly Israel focus. The historic ties that this Balfour Declaration began still bring dividends some 99 years later. Other members have outlined the close economic ties we have, a £5 billion bilateral trade, a doubling of economic trade over the last 10 years. I also want to celebrate our country's historic contribution to the modern state of Israel, and also celebrate the contribution that this tiny country on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea has made to our world. The formal recognition of the right to have an internationally established homeland for the Jews was one of the most interesting developments arising at the end of the First World War. The Balfour Declaration was very clear. It was the first statement of recognition by a major foreign power of the right of the Jewish people to national self-determination in their homeland, free and safe from persecution. Christians can worship freely and without any fear of persecution in Israel, and that's good news. Since the rebirth in 1948, Israel has been attacked many times, facing many threats on a daily basis. Yeah, I'm quite happy to.
Friend giving way. Is it worth reminding the House that the League of Nations in 1922 overwhelmingly ratified the Balfour Agreement unanimously?
That intervention, he's absolutely right. As a boy, I can well remember the Six-Day War, and that will always stick in my mind as the underdog holding fast and winning the battle. I remember as a little boy listening to the radio and my parents discussing what was happening. Mr. Chopin, it's one of those things that very much as in my early age, you can understand the fight that would always seem to exist This could easily be a time when a debate could degenerate into an anti-Palestine motion, and that's not what this is about. We are about celebrating the Declaration, which is instrumental in the Jews being allowed to establish an internationally recognised homeland. And that's what this debate is about today, is to recognise that. It was a formalisation of the right for this area to be asserted as their homeland, as Israel, that we all know from biblical times. The policy that expressed the establishment of a Jewish national home in Palestine became binding in international law following the 1920 San Remo Conference and the 1922 British mandate from the League of Nations that the Honourable Gentleman in his intervention referred to. The UN Resolution of 181 also said and reinforced it by the State of Israel's acceptance into the family of nations following the 1948 War of Independence. I'm happy away.
Tomlinson. Right to say this is not an anti-Palestinian motion, quite the opposite. Does he agree with me that this is an opportunity to encourage both sides to get together again to look towards a formal peace process?
It is. We're looking positive for something out of the debate. That's what we want to try and achieve. I've spoken many times in this House on the benefits that being allies with Israel has brought, along with the trade that the members have referred to, the pharmaceuticals, the technology, cybersecurity, research, the new drugs for Parkinson's sufferers, the implantable bio-retina that stimulates the neurons to send messages to the brain, the new plasma that amazingly eradicates the need for stitches or staples or glue. These are some of the things that Israel does and does well. This is a nation that can do so much for the rest of the world, and I believe should be allowed to carry out that work free from the prejudice and cloud of distrust that so often surrounds it. I've spoken on anti-Semitism 2 years ago in this place. It's unfortunate that it's still to be found, including the so-called boycott of Israeli products. If people only knew what they would be doing without, they would think very, very seriously about that. I, along with so many other colleagues, and I conclude with this, Mr. Chairman, are anticipating the plans that the FCO will bring as to the commemoration of this historic event. And I look forward to the ministerial responsibility. I'll put it away, yes.
Just before he concludes, would he agree with me that in terms of the Northern Ireland peace process, and many lessons have been drawn in relation to that process, that the one thing that we found was that economic prosperity and growing economic prosperity for everyone makes a major difference. Therefore, boycotts and economic sanctions and all of that kind of talk damages the prospects for peace.
My honourable friend and colleague has very wise words, and they're absolutely important for the day. I stand today in celebration of this declaration and the historical impact that it has had, and further than this, I stand today in celebration of Israel and a continuing solidarity with her in her struggle to be allowed to exist and to provide the Jews and non-Jews alike safety and security. Thank you.
Jonathan Chinoglu.
This tremendous debate. I thought that with the very few minutes that I have left, I'd actually give a little bit of reason behind the declaration itself, because what is unusual about the declaration is that it's not a settlement or reaction to any kind of nationalist war or terrorist activity in the way that we're now used to. Rather, it had its roots in lobbying carried out in the parliaments of Europe, mainly by bourgeoisie and aristocrats. Herzl and Lord Rothschild would have been seen as pretty distant characters, to say they're Polish ghetto co-religionists, who were much more likely to follow the socialist kibbutz-type Zionism that eventually had a very important role in the practical settlement of the new state. So what actually happened? What did Herzl do that made these very different Jewish characters and political creeds all move generally in the same nationalist direction? Herzl was the first person to explain not just how Europe's Jews were individually or nationally in peril, but how they were internationally at risk. Over less than a decade, he persuaded most Jews of most classes and political views that whether or not they as individual Jews wished to live in Europe, collectively, the Jews' future depended on their once again having their own independent nation on their own soil. Herzl suggested that the concept of Jews as a wandering diaspora should be replaced with Jews being allowed to lead the life of normal people with all the rights, benefits, and indeed challenges that go with that. Herzl died in 1904, for 13 years before the Declaration. But the dream that he created was the dream of a functioning Jewish homeland, and it was this dream that brought the Jews out of the ghetto cultural mentality, out of the ghetto language of Yiddish, and physically, many of them, out of the ghettos into Israel. This dream empowered Jews as human beings. It permitted them to be proud to stand up for their rights with a united destiny based on shared religious and cultural values, not least the rebirth of the spoken Hebrew language. It was this Zionist movement that increasingly persuaded world leaders to understand that Jewish homelessness must come to an end, and that the solution was down to the international community and world leaders working together with the Jewish people. This was the spirit of recognition encapsulated in the Balfour Declaration, which, as my honourable friend for Eastbourne explained so well, was then incorporated into the Sevres Peace Treaty with the Ottoman Empire, and finally the UN resolution establishing the State of Israel. And it is for this reason that Jews around the world highly valued the Balfour Declaration then, and why I believe it should now still be celebrated by those who understand or accept the then Zionist dream and now reality of a Jewish homeland in Israel.
George Curran.
Thank you, Mr. Choate. Can I obviously begin by commending the member for Eastbourne for initiating what I'm sure is going to be a year of these discussions. I have the honour to represent East Lothian, which of course was the seat that Arthur Balfour represented in this House. And his name is still very much alive in East Lothian. I visited Wittysham, where he lived, and where I think there were cabinet meetings occasionally in the long recess. And Wittysham also became the home to, I think, around half of the kinder transport children who came to the UK in 1939. And they were sent there because it was also, the family had turned it into a farming school. And the children there were, over the course of World War II, learned farming skills, and many of them went back to Palestine in the late 40s and were involved in the kibbutz movement. So I have an affinity. I think it is right, Mr. Choate, that we should mark the 100th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. But I use the word mark very carefully rather than celebrate, because I think it is an important historical moment in time, but it is, and this is my basic point, unfinished business. The Declaration saw not just one homeland for the Jewish people, but it saw also that the rights of other people within and other nationalities, growing nationalities within the region, would be protected. That clearly has not happened. So the underlying message, I think, and the thing that we can give to history and the peoples of the Middle East in the next 12 months is to reanimate the peace process so that we end up with two states. I will.
I thank my colleague for giving way. And I'm just back from a week as part of the first SNP delegation to Israel and Palestine. And I do come back with a number of thoughts. Above all else, as my honourable friend said, the absolute importance of us doing everything we can to support progress to a sustainable two-state solution for these two peoples. Does my honourable friend agree with that?
I do indeed. And can I just say that I think, given the time, I won't take more interventions. No, please. Don't think I'm being disrespectful to members, but do this very quickly. Two-state solution. Now, the member for Bury South made the point in his speech that sometimes the two-state rhetoric hides other agendas. I want to be very plain on behalf of the Scottish National Party. We are genuinely supportive of a two-state solution, and in fact, I think that is the key to Israel's security. Israel, for good or ill, has decided in recent decades that its security is basically based on force of arms. I think, as one of the other members, the Liberal Democrat member, said, time is running out for that. I had the great opportunity to have conversations with Ariel Sharon while he was still Prime Minister on the whole issue of Israel's security. And he, being an old general, he tended to look at things in military terms, and he said that his explanation to me was that the West Bank settlements, the extension of the West Bank settlements, and the maintenance of an Israeli security zone within the West Bank was necessary, this is how he put it to me, to protect the tank avenues that tank thrusts from Syria and Iraq would come in and cut Israel off very quickly because, as we know, the narrow waist of Israel is very tiny, and you could get a tank thrust through there very, very quickly. Now, does anyone in this room really think that Syria or Iraq or any of the other major states in the Middle East are in any sense capable, as we speak, of taking on Israel militarily or even politically? Are they in that situation? Of course they are not. Israel, therefore, has a security window where it can produce a two-state solution. That is where we have to go. And my question really to the Minister is how the British government is going to use this 12 months to ensure that that happens. Because Britain has a responsibility, members. The Balfour Declaration is not quite as it has been presented today. It's a studiously ambivalent document, quite deliberately so, because Britain and France had decided to exclude the Ottoman Empire from the principles, the Wilson principles, Versailles, of self-determination. The Middle East was not given self-determination. It was carved up by the British and French for their own political and economic ends. And that remained the case all through the British Mandate. And I think it is very strange, and I say this because I want to try and find as much common ground here as possible. But it's very strange, in all the speeches we have had, no one has actually strayed into the territory of what happened during the time of the British Mandate, when both the Jewish people and the Arab people rose in revolt against the way Britain had handled the Mandate. In fact, in 1948, sadly, in my view, Britain walked away from the Mandate, leaving a mess. Because the British Mandate was not seen as a way of bringing two peoples to self-determination. It was a way of securing Britain's military presence in the Canal Zone. It was a way of securing Britain's military presence in the Middle East as oil developed. It was not as selfless. Balfour Declaration is nowhere near as selfless as being presented here. It was part of a chain of diplomatic initiatives that Britain had, which broke up the old Ottoman Empire. And I think anybody sensibly looking at the state of the Middle East now would say that those interventions made things worse rather than better. And if we recognise that, then we are in a position morally, and I say this to the Minister, to begin to come back and say how we can make things, how we can have some redress for the political and economic disaster that we caused in the Middle East. So we have limited time, Mr. Short. We want to say is we have a debt of honour. We have a debt of honour because of the Balfour Declaration. If it means anything to anybody, it's unfinished business. Now, that's as far as I think we should go in history, Mr. Cho. I think if we start picking over every single piece of who did what over the last 100 years, we will not get anywhere. So I give that as I ask that humbly to members all on the other side. A lot has been made in a number of speeches about 1948, when it is absolutely clear the UN did declare a mandate for two nations within a particular map, and that project foundered in the first Arab-Israeli war. But you see, if you mention that and say the Arab states were wrong to intervene in 1948, they should have respected the United Nations mandate. If you say that, then you are duty-bound, and I put this to the member for Eastbourne, you are then duty-bound to accept all the other UN mandates and security resolutions, the 12 UN Security Council resolutions that have condemned the illegal settlements on the West Bank. I don't think it is possible, and I've also met the current Prime Minister of Israel, and I've talked to him, and I understand his position, talks without preconditions. I understand that, and that's a fair point to put forward. But if while you are waiting for negotiations with the Palestinians with no preconditions, you are expanding the illegal settlements. And I use the word illegal because they've been condemned as illegal by the British government and by the UN Security Council. If you go on doing that kind of expansion, then your good faith is called into question. And we need good faith somewhere in this debate. So I'll finish this, Mr. Choate. Let's mark the Balfour Declaration. But the only way of marking it is to finish the process it started, which will end in two states and a recognition of a Palestinian state.
Catherine West.
It's a pleasure to share under your chairmanship, to contribute under your chairmanship. May I begin by congratulating the member for Eastbourne for securing this debate as part of the commemorations marking the centenary of the Balfour Declaration. And as we've heard, the 1917 Declaration signalled the beginning of Britain's official support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people. Even before the famous letter from Lord Balfour to Walter Rothschild, the Labour Party supported this commitment. The War Aims Memorandum, adopted by the Inter-Allied Labour and Socialist Conference in 1918 and quoted by the member for Bury South today, stated that Palestine should be set free in order that this country may form a free state under international guarantee to which such of the Jewish people as desire to do so may return. And Labour's first Cabinet Minister, Arthur Henderson, outlined his support at the time of the War Aims Memorandum, stating that the British Labour Party believes that the responsibility of the British people in Palestine should be fulfilled to the utmost of their power. It believes that these responsibilities may be fulfilled so as to ensure the economic prosperity, which picks up some of the points made earlier in the debate, and the spiritual freedom of both the Jews and Arabs in Palestine. And that support for the State of Israel has been at the core of the Labour Party's foreign policy since those early days. As the member for Wavertree alluded to in her contribution, in the years 1917 to 1945 at Labour Party conferences, support for Zionism was expressed on no fewer than 11 occasions. And we stand in solidarity today as we mark the 100 years and stand firmly against anyone who questions Israel's right to exist.
Both Israel and Palestine have a right to exist, so would the Minister agree with me that the UK Government should now join with 70% of the other member states and recognise a Palestine state?
Shadow Minister.
I believe that the Minister will answer that shortly. The Labour Party supports a comprehensive peace in the Middle East, a permanent and long-term peace based on a two-state solution. That is a secure Israel alongside a secure and viable state of Palestine, respecting the boundaries as outlined in UN Resolution 242 from 1967. Violence against Israel in any form is unacceptable and can never be justified, and represents a mortal threat to any peaceful long-term solution. As the member for Bury South has said, any hatred of Jewish people is anathema wherever it is found. At a time when peace is also under threat from the retroactive legislation of settler outposts in the West Bank and from the prospect of new settlements in the West Bank, we must continue to reiterate the importance of the Israeli government itself remaining committed to the two-state solution.
Alan Brown.
Does the Shadow Minister not think we should do more than just issue platitudes about the illegal settlements and the fact that outposts are now being legalised by the Israeli government? Take firm action.
Catherine West.
I thank the member for his contribution, and I would beg to differ that these are platitudes. This is stating a position. And I think for anyone who's visited that area, this is a very sensitive topic and needs to be dealt with carefully without inflammatory language.
Barrows.
Practically projects for peaceful coexistence, such as Save a Child's Heart, Paris Centre for Peace, Middle East Entrepreneurs of Tomorrow, which are really showing the lead of the spirit of Balfour for that peaceful coexistence we all want between Palestinians and Israelis.
Catherine West.
Member's quite right to mention the economic element, because if we could somehow provide better livelihoods for people across the area, I think we would really gain some way. But there are real barriers to proper economic development within various communities in the area. But any charitable work which is done to promote that, I believe, should be welcome. Israeli settlements in the occupied territories are unlawful under international law, and the continued demolition of Palestinian structures undermines the Palestinian community's ability to develop socially and economically. This in turn undermines the viability of a future Palestinian state. As the member for Hammersmith, who's no longer in his place, has pointed out, the Balfour Declaration also made the commitment that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. We've heard about the Christian community today. We've supported and honoured Lord Balfour's commitment to create a national home for the Jewish people. And as the member for Waverley said earlier in the debate, it's now incumbent on all to honour the second part of the declaration. And as the member for, not Waverley, Worley, who's no longer in his place, said that we do need international guarantees. And I look forward to hearing from the Minister about how he interprets the concept of the international guarantees, so that we can ensure the rights of the non-Jewish communities in Palestine. As we approach the centenary of the Balfour Declaration, the Labour Party is glad to commemorate that historic anniversary and express its continued support for the State of Israel. We remain committed to seeing the achievement of lasting security, stability and peace in the region. However, we do find ourselves somewhat in a deadlock of the peace process, which the SNP spokesman referred to earlier. And I would be very grateful if the Minister could emphasise and enlighten to members what our government is doing to rejuvenate the moribund approach to peace in this critical area in the Middle East. We believe there are enough progressive forces on all sides of the Israel-Palestine conflict to shift the debate away from extreme and entrenched positions towards that lasting peace. And as we've always done, we will continue to do our part to support that process, to help ensure that the two-state solution becomes a genuine reality and to deliver the full intent of the Balfour Declaration. Thank you, Mr. Choate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chip. It's a pleasure to work under your chairmanship, and can I begin, as others have done, in congratulating my honourable friend for Eastbourne on securing this important debate. It really is an honour to be able to respond to the debate entitled "This House has considered the Centenary of the Balfour Declaration." The letter written by the Foreign Secretary then, Arthur James Balfour, on the 2nd of November in 1917 to Lord Rothschild, leader of the British Jewish community. If I may, I think we need to place into context today's instability and indeed conflict, which goes back beyond 100 years, indeed arguably thousands of years, because it is in this complex part of the world, often referred to as the cradle of civilization, that forms the crossroads of three continents, and where along the riverbanks and oases and coastlines we actually saw the start of humanity develop in harnessing the skills of farming, of writing, of trading, and indeed building the first cities. And it is here on this complicated real estate that gave the world the three great monotheistic religions, whose values underpin much of the morality of the world today. I won't, I'm afraid, if there's time at the end. And successive civilizations, the superpowers of their day, Egyptians, Assyrians, Romans, Byzantines, Ottomans, sought ownership of these tribal areas, the rich trade routes, and the holy sites as well. And with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, as has been said in this debate today, at the end of the Great War, it was Britain's turn, as the occupying power, to manage this complex, multilingual, multi-faith tribal land. Now, Britain was motivated by a range of ambitions at the time, some altruistic and some self-interested. The decisions and influences made then, from the Sykes-Picot Agreement to the Balfour Declaration, the McMahon-Hussein correspondence, or Britain's role in general in shaping the Middle East, continue to provoke intense discussion today. The Declaration is certainly part of our history, a part that some celebrate and others condemn. The Declaration did not create the State of Israel, but it was a stepping stone along the way. And when Theodor Herzl was writing his vision of Zionism in the late 19th century, the preference was for a Jewish homeland in the biblical land of Israel. Now that movement grew, and that land, which included Jerusalem, and the meeting point of the three Abrahamic religions, became a destination for Jewish migration, first under the Ottoman Empire, then the British Mandate, and finally after the establishment of the Israeli state. The Balfour Declaration played a part in that story, but like so much of foreign policy, it was a product of its age. It was written in a world of competing imperial powers, in the midst of the First World War and in the twilight of the Ottoman Empire. And many people believed that establishing a homeland for the Jewish people in the land, which they had such strong historical and religious ties, was indeed the right and moral thing to do. It is for historians, I say, to assess the Declaration in that context. It is for ministers to deal with the today. Now, Balfour's 67 words are now dissected and analysed as they have been done today. It was a statement of intent rather than a detailed plan. The details came later in the San Remo Agreement of 1920 and in the League of Nations mandate for Palestine in 1922. And the Israeli state was established after the end of Britain's mandate. But the Balfour Declaration had its flaws. It called for the protection of the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. It should have protected their political rights too, most especially their right to self-determination, a right which underpins the British commitment to a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we will mark the centenary of the Balfour Declaration next year. I say to honourable members, planning is still at an early stage. But I will make it clear that we neither celebrate nor we apologise. We will not apologise, for the UK is a diverse country in which this historical show of support for the world's Jewish community means a great deal to many people. And we continue to support the principle of the Jewish homeland and the modern state of Israel, just as we support the critical objective of a Palestinian homeland. But nor do we celebrate the centenary, as others have called on the British government to do. The seriousness of the situation faced by millions still affected by this conflict is a testament to the fact that achievement of a Jewish and Palestinian self-determination in the former British Mandate of Palestine is a task as yet unfulfilled. So I remain conscious of the sensitivities surrounding this declaration and events that have taken place in the region since 1917. We cannot change the past, but we can strive to influence the future. It is approaching 100 years since Balfour Declaration, but I think has also been mentioned by honourable members, it's 50 years since the occupation began. It's 70 years since the UN Resolution 181 in 1947 first proposed a partition and the end of the British Mandate. It is also 23 years since the Oslo Accords. It's 16 years since the Camp David discussions. It's 25 years since the Madrid talks, and it's 18 years since the Wye River discussions. All of these were opportunities where stakeholders were brought around the table to seek a long-term solution, and still that eludes us. Briefly, yes.
Be very brief, Mr. Chope. I wonder whether the Minister would also comment on the recent French government initiative last month. Thank you.
Minister. Certainly I'll come to that very shortly indeed. But whilst these arrangements, these agreements, these gatherings have come and gone and we've not been able to make progress, let's just turn to the south and see the deal that took place 36 years ago between Israel and Egypt. And further to the west with Jordan in 1994, 22 years ago. That proves what can happen when sides come together, when conflict stops, when war is put aside, when strong leadership comes together. The relationship between Israel, Egypt and Jordan is to be commended. And it shows that deals can be struck regardless of what's happened in the past. I will.
This point about leadership. Would he agree that leadership from Britain must include British values? There are over 3,000 British graves in Gaza cemeteries. Does he agree British values include protecting refugees and protecting children, hence the right to return for refugees and protection of children in courts?
I do, and if I may, I will come on to what Britain is doing in both the occupied territories and the West Bank and Gaza, as well as in Israel, if there's time permitting. But I say that the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict is no doubt a highly emotive issue, as has been expressed today. Israel has achieved statehood, whilst the Palestinians have not. But the UK government is very, very clear indeed that the occupation of the Palestinian territories is unacceptable and unsustainable. And when we look at this in the long term, it is not in Israel's best interest for the status quo to continue. Simply because if this is to be a homeland for the Jewish people, the demographics of it show that there will be an imbalance in the next few years. There are also over 40,000 Palestinians helping provide security in areas A and B. Now, were that to be removed, were the Palestinians to give up then it would be up to the Israelis to provide that security. Is that a direction that we want to go? Is that a path that we want to go down or even test? It is in everybody's interest not to believe in the status quo, but to work towards a two-state solution. Mr. Chope, not everyone will be happy with the government's position on the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration. I fully accept that. There'll be those who want to celebrate unreservedly the anniversary, who will see our position actually as insufficient. And there'll be those who will condemn it, who want us to actually make this apology and will consider marking of the anniversary improper. There is no denying the document's significance. I hope that this will not be used as a vehicle to incite violence or distract us from the taking steps that we need to secure that two-state solution. I will.
Okay, but just in case he was about to conclude, I just wonder if he could use the last 4 minutes or so to set out very concrete UK government initiatives that he is going to be driving to ensure that we achieve that two-state solution.
Minister. I will lead up to that towards the end. I intend to make those points. But I was simply saying that an awful lot of effort and noise and concern is being expressed about the Balfour Declaration and this 100th anniversary. I would hate it to be seen as an excuse to incite further violence. We need to learn from the past, but work towards the future. And that future is what the prosperity and security is what Israelis, the people of Israel, and indeed the Palestinians actually want. I will say, on a personal note, that this has been 3 years, leading to the Honourable Gentleman's point. It's been a privilege to be the Minister for the Middle East. And in these 3 years, this government, the British government, the foreign secretaries, both of them, and indeed myself, have been absolutely fully committed to doing what we can in leveraging our support and our influence to bring the parties to the table. But I have to say, I've sat through a series of meetings in New York, at the UN General Assembly, in Paris, at the summit that took place there as well. And I actually made the case to say, which generation is it? In my speech, I said, who is it? Who are the leaders going to be? Given the fact that we've had so many years since Oslo, Madrid, Wye River, and Camp David, when will we finally strike that solution and get that accord in place and recognise the two states? Because at the moment, I have to say, of all the briefs, of all the challenges that I had to look for, this has been the toughest but most, I think, the most frustrating in not being able to make progress. And in answer to his question, at the moment we seem further away than ever of bringing the actual parties together. We are not seeing the leadership on the Palestinian side that will evoke the necessary measures of support to bring people to the table. And on the Israeli side, it makes it much, much tougher to defend our friend and ally when we see the continuing building in the settlements itself. And I certainly hope that in the absence of moving closer to a solution, we are at the tenure of a new opportunity with an administration coming in the United States. And I ask the new administration, as they settle in, to lean into this, to consider what needs to be done. Other issues across the world have come and gone, from conflicts in the Balkans, even the Berlin Wall coming down, and yet we now have new ones that are coming to the fore. Libya, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. Are these other problems going to be solved, and yet still the Middle East peace process eludes us? So I ask the United States to work with the international community, along with the Israelis and the Palestinians. Let's recognize this 100 years, this anniversary. But why don't mark it, 2017, not by what's happened in the past and the fact that it's been 100 years, but what we can achieve for the future. Thank you.
Caroline Ansell.
Thank you, Mr. Chope. And as I had envisaged, it has been a very lively debate, passion on all sides. But I think what really struck me was when an honourable member talked about grieving and lamenting. And I think today we can all grieve and lament with the lives that have been lost and the conflict that we've seen. But I hope too that we can all look to see what has come through and forward and positively impacted
the world in this creation of the State of Israel, and what a justice has been served there, and that we can all now with one voice urge again that resumption of